What up, what up, what up? The last cooking and politics video I did, a couple people seemed interested in. At least a couple people clicked on it. And I like cooking, and I like politics. So why not do it again? This is episode 2 of Cooking and Politics. I spent a lot of money at the grocery store yesterday. I know I probably should have tried to be a little bit better, but I wanted to get multiple things that didn't require me having to go to the store every single time I wanted something to eat. So I decided to kind of bulk buy a little bit more. So hopefully in the long run it'll save me money. I'm trying to make a soup that, because the soup I made last week, it had so much stuff in it that basically it was hard for me to kind of make it last. It was going bad. I didn't want to put it in the freezer. So this one I'm trying to make just a little bit better. I want to make it a little bit more friendly for people. This lighting is not doing me any favors. This white shirt, like if I step back here, it's like Casper. My muscles look good though. Ugh. Pretty good. Not too bad. I can do a little bit more cardio, a little bit less food, but hey, nobody's perfect, right? I'm gonna chop some white onions. I have 2 white onions because last week the onion smell is one of my favorite smells. I know my fiance doesn't like it, but you know, onions are really good for you. They do have a little bit of sugar in it, so you have to be careful about that. I'm also trying something a little bit new. I'm trying to pickle some onions. I have some red onions. I didn't have any vinegars. That's one of the few things I forgot to buy, but I did have pickle brine. And I basically put pickle brine, water, some more salts, some lemon juice, because I know that's not vinegar, but I felt like it would add a little bit more acidity still. And then I found out that some of my Italian dressing had vinegar in it, and I was like, well, you know, I'll try putting that a little bit in it. Vinegar and oil. Oil is always good. Oil makes everything good. Oil is so good that we'll go to war with several nations for it. I don't think it's for olive oil. The word oil does get our politicians' dicks a little bit hard on. So what kind of politics are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk about political accountability and how it virtually doesn't seem to exist. One of the many complaints that I have, I will always have, and I shall always have, is that I feel like we care so much about what's happening in the media that we forget what happens 3 fucking weeks ago. Unless if you're an individual. And here's the thing, right? Individuals can like have things last and reputations ruined forever. To a point to where like saying the wrong thing on the internet or like having a wrong, not necessarily having a wrong opinion, but like saying something that people don't really appreciate can really ruin your internet presence. It kind of happened with Bradley Martin, right? His subscribers kind of stagnated a little bit. And it's because he's a big dude who thinks that because he's big, he can fight everybody, which, as a big dude, I can tell you that's not fucking true. Nobody cares how big you are. Yes, if you're big, you can get a lucky punch in here and there, but if you don't know any good defense, you don't know how to fight. I spent years learning how to do defensive tactics. But, you know, why do I say this, right? You know, if your boss fucks up or your job fucks up, everything seems to organize around you forgetting it. You know, if your boss does something bad or something that they're not supposed to do, their reputation really isn't ruined the same way. But if an employee fucks up or does something or says something stupid, everybody remembers that shit. And the same thing goes true with the American people. If you're a local celebrity and you're an individual person, everybody holds you accountable. But the moment there's like 3 fucking people or more, It's almost like the accountability and the goes away, and people are very fucking quick to forget what happens with anything that happens more than like 3 fucking weeks ago. So why do I say this? It's because so much has happened in our media. It's almost as if our government is relying on you not paying attention to them. And because you're not paying attention to them, you're only really going to see the buzz stories that happen on the media. You're also going to have a hard time because if you pay attention to it, you're going to see the one news story at a time, even though multiple things are happening at the same time. The Republican Party right now is kind of in a clusterfuck. So here's essentially what happened. Trump went into office, signed 1 million executive orders, and people who don't want to pay attention to politics but still want to comment on it will say things like, well, he did more in his first week in office than anybody did in 4 years. Which isn't true. And nobody really questions, unless if you are somebody who is a Democrat or a liberal, what those things were. SNAP benefits were cut away. A lot of laws that people actually either should like a lot more, but really don't pay attention to it. Or just things that we actually kind of need were signed away. Some of it a little bit illegal. So, what's one thing that people should have liked a lot more, but they hated the messenger so much that people just didn't know to appreciate it? Well, the Democrats had passed a bill during the Biden administration that essentially said that these 10 drugs, insulin being the main one that everybody focuses on and focused on, cannot be more expensive than X. They basically put a price ceiling on it. The reason why is because other nations, for a long time, had insulin for significantly cheaper. Sometimes as cheap as like 90 or 95% cheaper than what you'd have to pay in the United States. To a point to where people who had diabetes would have to buy off-brand insulin. Well, if you know anything about diabetes, as somebody who has met a lot of diabetics and who has seen a lot of diabetic blood sugar crashes and things like that, the right insulin matters. You have different brands of insulin. You have fast acting, you have slow acting. You have certain brands that just interact with certain people's bodies a little bit differently. Some people will tell you, hey, this insulin, for whatever reason, makes my blood sugar drop a lot faster than this other insulin. Even if they're both slow acting. Because it's just different people and different bodies doing things. Now, I'm going to braise some beef for a second. Now, another thing that happened, and that's been happening, is that Elon Musk has been going around trying to basically shut down whatever government spending he doesn't like. Online meme culture will have you believe that he is policing our government, holding them accountable, and making sure they're not wasting money. That's the entire narrative that's been going around with this. What has actually been happening is he has a staff of people unqualified to do anything in relation to this, going around and basically trying to shut out, delete government programs while having access to millions, if not hundreds of millions of people's social security and private information. One of them was recently fired for being too racist. Isn't that funny? Marjorie Taylor Greene was a little bit embarrassed when it came to some of the questions that she had, because she claims that Elon Musk is basically doing what the voters asked for. And here's the thing. Voters didn't really ask for a lot of things. The narrative that's been essentially continuously being pushed is that Trump had this landslide victory. And they keep showing the voting map. But in actuality, the difference in votes between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris was smaller than the difference in votes between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden actually had a greater lead over Donald Trump than Donald Trump had over Kamala Harris. However, nobody in the conservative media would ever admit to this. The reason why is because they want to push this narrative that they want you to think that this is overwhelmingly what people and the American people want. Here's the truth. The Department of Government Efficiency is not saving the government money. It is causing a fuckload of legal problems, and it's preventing people who should have clearance and the ability to go into these buildings from actually being able to go into these buildings. I'm just gonna brown these on each side. We're gonna get a big bowl. All we're worried about is browning the beef for right now. So whenever this is browned for a couple minutes on each side, it's going to be taken out into the bowl, and then the onions are going to go in. They're going to caramelize with the fond the beef has in the bottom of the pan. I'll probably add a little bit of butter because I'm naughty. Anyway, what has also been happening is that there's been a lot of Nazi shit happening. Arnold Schwarzenegger, believe it or not, recently came out and demanded that Donald Trump step down from his position. And if you're an American citizen right now, you're one of two people, or three people rather. You are somebody who is overly angry about with the government right now, and has been angry for the government for a long time, but is only getting more upset. You're somebody who has ignored politics to the point to where it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind, and you're not really concerned about it because it's not the presidential race anymore, and you only really pay attention to this stuff when it's a presidential race. Or you're somebody who thinks you support these ideas until these ideas personally affect you. It's very easy to say things like, hey, I do not want the government spending money on people who don't want to help themselves. Well, what happens when you lose your job? What happens when you have no options? Because there are hundreds of people applying to every single job, and it's not so easy anymore to get a job. Or it's not so easy anymore to get health insurance. Or it's not so easy anymore to get some of the things that you need in day-to-day life. And here's what I've noticed. I've never believed in a soul. But I think if there was such a thing as a soul, we are losing it rapidly. The reason why is because the public narratives of what we talk about, when it comes to things like homelessness, poor people, people who have different opinions than us, is becoming callous to the point to where it's almost as if we're trying to justify violence. You heard about this if you watched my video where I talked about how people at the Trump rally, where that guy got shot, people were like, he was at a Trump rally. It's like getting upset that a Nazi racist got shot. There are also people who overwhelmingly, for some reason, don't really give a shit about homeless people. Even though homelessness isn't always a personal choice. This bothers me for a multitude of reasons. Let me get this out so I'm not thinking about two things at the same time. That's juicy. Anyway, this bothers me for a multitude of reasons. The first time I saw this was when I saw a clip on Tom Segura on Joe Rogan, where they were complaining about homelessness rights and how whatever area they're in and they have their little tents up can be considered their property and blah blah blah, and you can't just move them. And Tom Segura just casually talks about thinking about shooting them. We have a very dangerous philosophy right now because of our modern day society. We worship people who are successful to the point to where we think that not being successful is a personal choice. If you wanted to be successful, or if you wanted to have a house, or you wanted to be X, or you wanted to be Y, you would simply choose it. Well, let's take something that we know for a fact is true and that everybody's kind of been told is pretty much true, right? Not everybody can be president. Not everybody can be a CEO. Not everybody can be a rock star. Not everybody can be a porn star. I mean, a lot of people can be porn stars. But success to that extent and to that degree is relegated to a lucky few. Houses, sometimes apartments in some places, are getting so expensive to where you almost have to be lucky to have the opportunity to have one of those without permanently financially fucking yourself. Also, I don't know if people realize this, homelessness isn't always a choice. You can't just will yourself to have the money to have a house. And you can't just make other bills and other debts that you might have because society tells you to have those things, tells you that you need to spend absurd amounts of money for a college education, tells you that you need to have a car payment, tells you that you need to have a credit card and have credit card debt and regularly pay that off to have a credit score to be able to qualify for any of these things. Because you have to have debt to get into debt, to have things that are too expensive for you, because we're unwilling to just simply build a very basic and small house without it being a trailer home. And even then, we're trying to make those luxury to the point to where it's kind of hard to find a trailer for under $100,000. And not everybody just has $100,000 lying around. I'm sick and tired of these wealthy motherfuckers who are so detached. And we're so detached from the day-to-day struggles of the American people that it's like we're just willing to blame you for struggling. And every time you do struggle, it's always a question of well, the government shouldn't be handing things out. The government shouldn't be handing things out. The government hands shit out all the fucking time, dude. I don't know if you know this, but all those government programs and everybody that works for the government is supposed to be providing a service for the public. How do I say this very carefully? We have people who are willing to use logic and reason and rationale to justify hating people who are struggling, to justify making things illegal that you can't really help, right? Like being an immigrant and saying that you should try to be an immigrant legally, you do realize that's not an option for everybody, right? You do realize that there are lines that are backed up, there are situations that you're trying to get out of. But let's go beyond even that, right? Let's say homelessness, right? We have cities that try to make homelessness illegal. So we criminalize you for not having property. We have tax dollars that go towards making public benches and all sorts of various other things uncomfortable for homeless people to sleep on, to the point to where people don't even really want to sleep on it. To where normal people don't even want to use them, really. Benches to lean on instead of a bench to sit on. Because we're trying to make our public spaces so uncomfortable that you can't just hang out in public, and that you can't just be a homeless person that's just spending time in a place until you're trying to figure something out. Now, I say all of this to say this. People like Ben Shapiro and people who claim to care about fiscal conservatism and financial responsibility don't really care about those things. They don't care that in 2008, when many people lost their houses, when many people lost their jobs, when many people were struggling, that very little money was spent to actually help those people. And even though this was a Democratic president, they don't really criticize Barack Obama for this, because they agree with this. And if anything, they would have done it more. We gave billions of dollars, actually trillions of dollars, to Wall Street, to people who were financially successful, because these people having absurd amounts of money in investments and in property values was seen as more important than people being able to afford to feed themselves, to pay for their houses, to not have their houses foreclosed upon. And I know it's a little bit more complicated than that, but needless to say is conservatives don't really complain when we give absurd amounts of money for people to people who have absurd amounts of money. They don't complain if a police department wants to hire more police officers. They don't complain if we hire more first responders, because those are immediate needs that can very easily be handled. They don't complain how expensive court is. They don't complain about how expensive it is to prosecute somebody, how expensive it is to house them in a jail, how expensive it is to house them in a prison. We don't complain about any of these things. Nobody does. Well, some people do. They won't complain about that. They don't complain about how expensive it is to go to war. We forget that much of our debt comes from the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, all of these places where, in all honesty, we really didn't have any business of being in most of them, if not all of them. But anybody who has a kid and struggles to feed that kid, they complain about money going towards students being fed at schools. Because we can afford to have so many school districts and so many students going to school and so many public schools, but we can't afford to feed those kids. We can afford the things in our society that are used to punish people. And it's not just police, it's your code enforcement, it's your it's your prosecuting attorneys, it's your judges, it's your people that are going out of their way to make things illegal. It's the people whose entire jobs it is to make sure that property rights and codes about your property to increase the value of said properties is there, but nothing is really there to make sure that properties are affordable. We don't spend money to solve problems that people face as a consequence for rich people trying to make a profit and for the government trying to punish people for the laws that it creates. And then we wonder why our government's approval rating is so low. We wonder why we have such a hard time communicating effectively with people, because people vote for whoever is the most rebellious, anti-establishment, or just different politician, because these politicians have put such a bad taste in our mouths. And I feel bad for people like Trump supporters, because I feel as though they have had a lot of problems for a long time, but the media has gone out of their way to make them believe that every single problem that you have is because of the Democrats, it's because of the liberal agenda, it's because of transvestites, it's because of all of these people that we want to demonize, illegal immigrants, people who want to have socialism, all sorts of things like that. And then they vote for people who outright do things against their own interests. And then they wonder why the government can never really seem to succeed, no matter how many times they get a Republican administration. It's almost like they're forced to turn their brains off. And then Fox News isn't willing to criticize their own political party, unless if there's just somebody that every single Republican outright doesn't like. And then it becomes this ridiculous cycle, and Democrats do it too. And it gets to a point to where we are unable to solve problems, and we are unable to figure out the fact that we just care more about our opinions than we do about actually figuring things out. And if you do want to solve a problem, you're considered to be woke, or you're considered to be a nerd, or somebody, a know-it-all, or somebody who is uneducated, who is saying opinions that they aren't really qualified to have. But that's always said against people who try to have solutions for the problems. I would rather have an incorrect solution than the solution to just be demonize people. Like, I'm sorry, and I know that this is going to be woke and offensive for a lot of people, but Mexicans have never really done anything to me. Transvestites have never fucking done anything to me. Gay people have never fucking done anything to me. Atheists and Satanists have never done anything to me. You know who has done things to me? Well, I've had police officers when I was a kid. One of them accused me of smoking weed, even though I never smoked weed. I looked like I smoked weed, and I was a teenager. And the police officer wanted to accuse my dad of being a bad person. I've had a lot of Christians be mean to me when I was younger because I grew up in the Bible Belt. I've had a lot of conservatives trying to cut benefits and get rid of laws that actually might help me. For example, one of the biggest coalitions and lobbying efforts was made to have supplements. You know, these things that we like to have. That says that we're super healthy. Yeah, funding and budgeting gets cut from things that actually make sure that what you're consuming is not only safe, but you know that they're not fucking false advertising to you. So now you get things like bottles like this that says things like, hey, this is guaranteed to make you build muscle. This is the best thing ever. Blah, 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 blah. We're just going to say all of these buzzwords and make all of these claims that aren't scientifically proven because people would rather believe lies about supplements than they would believe about truths, than they would then believe truths about medications. And people point to the side effects of medications and say, see, medication is bad for you, and then they denounce all medication. And then they don't acknowledge the fact that many of these companies who sell you supplements want you to believe untrue things about them. People who want you to believe things like, you know, if you take all of your vitamins, you're not going to have anything like cancer. People who want you to believe things like ashwagandha is going to make you a happier, less depressed person. Who the fuck is texting me? So anyway, I say all of this to say one thing. Politics is going to continue to be frustrating because we will forever refuse to admit our own faults, refuse to admit where we have contributed to a problem, and refuse to admit that we don't know enough about a problem that we probably should educate ourselves on if we're going to be willing to vote for it. And we stagnate. We stagnate to the point to where problems are going to continue to persist. I am very worried that within my lifetime, one of a few things is going to happen. I think our corporations are going to get so big because they already control everything about our lives. They control everything that we do. They can control who says what, who gets censored, what messages get sent out, who gets advertised more because they're saying more friendly things. And they continuously make it to where more and more of our infrastructure requires their technology. To a point to where, in order to survive, you're going to have to pay subscriptions for these things. And it's going to get to a point to where you almost are going to need insurance to pay for these subscriptions that effectively cost them $0 to be able to provide to you. We're going to have so many of our internet brainworms. I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the internet brainworms causing people to continuously vote against their interests to a point to where we're just not going to have a country anymore. We're not going to have a functioning country. And I think we're already halfway there when it comes to things like who's really in charge, who really gets to decide what they want, what they don't want, who spends money, what happens in the background. That's already been the case for a while. But it's out in the open, and a lot of people don't really seem to mind, while other people are really furious about it. And the people that are furious about it are acting surprised when this just seems to be the natural evolution of things. I think we're going to be... I'm worried these corporations are going to be so large that they are effectively going to replace our government, which they are already trying to do, and they've been trying to do for a long time. And I think that we're going to overly rely on our technology to the point to where we're just not going to know how to function without it. And I'm very scared about that. I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be a revolution involving both Republicans and Democrats. I think everybody needs to stop working. Everybody needs to stop paying for shit. Everybody needs to stop buying shit. And we need to be willing to tank our own stock markets and protest and stop traffic and do all of the things that we need to do to make the government understand that they cannot continue to politicize every issue to avoid solving issues. I am tired of hearing things like the woke, DEI, all of these things that are used to divert blame against problems. Because you cannot blame DEI for every single thing. And you cannot point to a Disney movie having a black main character for an otherwise white character as proof that we are lowering our standards so that black people and Mexicans can have jobs that they otherwise do not qualify for. And we cannot accept a government who acts so against our own interests that we just attribute everything to personal responsibility to a point to where people can't pull themselves out of poverty. Because the reason why we have a government is to provide goods and services and needs that you cannot commercialize. You should not, and we should not, have half the things that we have commercialized. And I know that everybody's going to talk about how this is socialism and blah, 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 blah. Here's the truth. Necessities and the rules about capitalism work in multiple different directions. We cannot just accept the logic of capitalism when it comes to something like a fucking fidget spinner and apply that same logic to something like safety, health, food, and shelter. Because those four things, people get desperate for, to a point to where you have people stealing. You have people who are willing to commit crimes to get enough money to be able to provide themselves with those things. You have people who are homeless and who struggle to find shelter and safety because of lack of shelter, meaning that of lack of shelter, somebody who's homeless who may not be using drugs has to find places to sleep away from people who do drugs and away from criminals who are also homeless. And it's to a point to where we're kind of living in the Hunger Games already. You know, we value wealthy people and celebrities so much that we refuse to understand that there are people who just get absurd amounts of money because they're liked. And people who need money are compared to those who are successful. And the successful people say, I worked hard for this. Because I worked for this, why can't you work for this? And poor people say, I worked to the point to where I have heart disease and I have these health issues and I drink caffeine to the point to where my kidneys are failing. All these lovely things, and I can't fucking get nowhere in life. I have no extra money. I'm in debt. I can't afford my bills because my apartment complex, every time I get a raise in my job, my apartment suddenly gets more expensive. And the person that owns my apartment just gets another fucking vacation home that they get to stay at. Our bosses are so successful at profiting off of our work that it gets to a point to where you really wonder, should it be legal? Because people struggle so much, it's going to get to a point where they're going to get desperate. When they get desperate, that's when crime goes up. This is why there was extra crime in the 90s and 80s. And this is why we're probably going to have a spike of crime the more government programs that we cut. The more government programs you cut, the more desperate people are going to get, and the more people are going to have to get arrested. The bigger our jails are going to have to get. The bigger our prison population is going to have to get. The more drug users we're going to have. And we're too busy deifying our politicians to a point to where it makes you wonder, if somebody has to be deified, if somebody has to be looked at as a perfect politician or a perfect person or somebody who has no flaws, who do you have to demonize and hate to a point to where every action that person takes is so justified? If I need to make somebody look bad, to make myself look good, that should say more about me than it does about the other person. Because of our recent bias, of our recency bias, our lack of actually being able to fact check things, we use groups of people, statistics, and I'm drawing a blank on the fucking word, and demographics of people as generalizations to a point to where we can blame groups of people for things. The Democrats blamed my group of people for them losing because we didn't want to go vote, because we didn't like any politicians, because we all think the exact same fucking way, right? Right. The Republicans blame everybody. They blame trans people, they blame woke people, they blame black people, they blame Mexicans, they blame fucking everybody. Anti-Christians, blah, blah, blah. Democrats blame conservatives, and they blame racists, and they blame people who are prejudiced, and for all of these problems, all of these are institutional problems. And all of our problems are ultimately rich versus poor. And it's kind of funny because Elon Musk and people like them, people knew that they were fakes, that they were liars, that these people were essentially scam artists who just kind of can build large enough companies and organizations and have enough people work for them to where they can't help but make money, because now Amazon is the standard for having things delivered, not FedEx or UPS. You know, it's essentially replacing it to a point to where they're trying to monopolize on it. And then you wonder why online products and shipping and these things that were once cheaper are slowly getting more expensive, and your delivery times, you're just going to have to pay a little bit more. We can still do that 2-day delivery, but now it's just a little bit more expensive. And every dollar that they increase it is just another fucking $1 billion that ends up in Jeff Bezos' bank account. You know, we knew that Elon Musk was a scam artist when it came to flying to Mars, and every fucking 6 months he would say, oh yeah, in 2 years we'll be on Mars, or the Hyperloop, or the solar panel uh, roofing tiles that end up being fake, or the Tesla bot where he literally had a person in spandex dancing on stage. We knew all of this, yet the internet only cared about it when you found out that he was a fake gamer because he claimed to be the number one Diablo player in the world or whatever. That's the only time that people really focused on it. And because it's not really politically convenient, the media lets you focus on it. They don't really care about that, but they will keep buttering him up and hyping him up for every other thing, no matter how much of a scam it is. To a point to where we have our car company makes some of the shittiest electric cars in the entire world. Tesla cars are not that good of a vehicle, and they're kind of awful. They're kind of throwaway cars. They last 100,000 miles maybe. The battery's overly priced. It's not able to drive itself the way he says it is. And he doesn't even produce nearly as much to justify how expensive his stocks are. But he's trying to have this savior complex. And because he has the savior complex, everybody who disagrees with him or speaks out against him for the longest time was somebody who just wanted to stop human evolution. Hatred is a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool, and it is one that can be used to make you justify nearly anything. And it makes me wonder, you know, with all of the struggles that I'm currently facing, that I will face, that I'll have to face at some point, how much more screwed are we going to have to get before we understand that our politicians, no matter the political party, has either outright done things against our interests or hasn't done enough for our interests for us to decide that we need to restart, that we need a new government, we're going to have a revolution, we're going to actually storm the Capitol and actually hold the real politicians accountable and force our politicians to make anti-lobbying laws, force our politicians to be criminally prosecuted by accepting this money and voting against their interests, because it's more important that some guy that you've never heard of makes money instead of you having clean water. It's more important that somebody's property value is increased than it is for you to be able to build a tiny house, because most of our zoning laws makes it illegal. It's more important for a billionaire to get away with not paying any taxes, so you have to pay your taxes to offset it, and your taxes have to increase so that we can justify this. It's more important for a business to not pay taxes, but you still have to pay the sales taxes, and you still have to pay all these things. All of the cost falls onto you and to the government. But we have people who are wealthier than nations. And those are the people that we most say shouldn't have to be taxed, shouldn't have to do all these things. Oh, they work so much harder than you. I want you to look at me in the face and tell me that anybody who sits on their ass all day and takes credit for other people's work works harder than you. These people are nothing more than overglorified managers. They are just managers that merely can take advantage of the work that people have, and because you have no choice but to work for them, because you have no choice but to use their products, because you have no choice but to expect this standard of living and buy their technology and use it to be able to function in modern day society, they profit off of it. And they profit off of you being required to use it because we haven't held them accountable.